back here again, but this time I will be talking about the Boule. Got a short film, but this gonna be before the film, which gonna be on the film as well. So when you see this, know the film coming right after this on the same video. And I'm gonna read a couple scripture. And this part one of the Boule. And the first scripture I will be reading will come out of John 12 and 43. John 12 and 43. I'm sure I get to reading. Yeah, it's real. Like I said, I was trying to get all these out this week. Trying to have everything done, for we can get some good understanding. 12 and 43 the verse. Boule topic. And as it reads, for they love to praise a man. Let me read that back over. For they loved it to praise a man more than the praise of God. That's them Boules. See them everywhere you go, at work, family members. You see them everywhere. Pastors and teachers and elders, some camps, and so some churches. They love, them Boules. You got a lot of Boules out here. It's something serious. They love their master. They love their oppressor. But they say they love the Father and the Son, but they don't. Like he told them, how can you love my people, love me and don't love my people? How can you love me and don't love your brethren? That means brother and sister, brother, however you want to put it. Your people. So let's go to Proverbs chapter 1. And we're going to go to chapter 1, verse 7. For the Boule. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Ooh, the fear of what? The Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But guess what? So many uneducated folks, this is what they don't understand. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. Because see, they getting their instruction from out of what? Out of man-made book. A man-made doctrine. Anything beside this book is a man-made doctrine of Satan. So, let's go for all your doctorate degrees, your associate degrees, your master degrees, all that bull crap comes from man because they don't mean nothing. Just like he said, a fools despise wisdom and instruction. See, our people don't like no instruction. That's why I don't like reading this book. But they can read the instruction manual for how to build a car, a truck, build a house, or fix appliances, or what they boss said, or whatever the pastor said. When they give them instruction, they can get that, jump right on it. You know what I'm saying? But they won't get the instruction out of this book. They give them wisdom, not to understand it from above, give them eternal life, salvation, give them their crown. They don't want that. They want what the world have them off. A bunch of lust, a bunch of evil things, a bunch of evil things. They want that sex with the world. You know what I'm saying? They want that fornication. They want that lust of the eyes. They want that lust of the mind. Do you hear me? They want that what? They want that what? Huh? I used to say, get them what they need, not what they want. But see, our people want they wants. They don't want what they need out this book. Keep them laws, statutes, and commandments. Let's go to verse 22, same chapter. Proverbs 1, verse 22. How long, ye simple ones, will ye love synthetic? Ooh, simple. Our people simple-minded. Father tells this all the time through the scripture. Our people love this world. They love the things of it. They love the houses, the cars, the shoes, the jewelry, the money, the lustful, the lust. They love it all. But they say they love the Father. Say he love the Son. Say he love the Son, love the Father. Because what did the Father say? You got to come through his Son to be able to see him. Get finished with the verse. And the sorcerer delight in their sorcerer. That means these witches, voodoo doctors, you know what I'm saying? Our people love going to them and putting spells and potions, spell potions and curses on our own people. Sad. Sad that our people do that. Just don't know the Father got something for you. When he put hands on you, he really gonna put hands on you. We ain't talking about that fake ass stuff you see on your Christian your favorite Christian pastor or your favorite I call them the hymn she Tyler Perry and them and all them. No. Ain't getting none of them fake TV snakes hands and Cruff steal all your dollars hands on you, huh? Joe Pope Osteen, you don't get none of that. Come out. And if I lay hands on you, he gonna lay hands on you. And you might not get up behind it, but if you do, you better be praising and thanking him and give him all the glory and all the honor and praying every day and repenting that he gave you that grace time. One of the best gifts he could have gave was grace. So, it's just crazy. And then he ended with, and fools hate knowledge. Didn't he just say that in verse 7? Didn't he just say that fools hate knowledge? Huh? Fools hate instruction. Father don't lie about his peoples. We see it every day. But I'm gonna read the last verse. It's gonna be out of First John chapter 3 and verse 7. Alrighty. Almost there, family. I done made it. It's for our people. And please, people, please just listen to this. Get out your feelings, get out your emotion, because I don't give a damn about it at all. Get this word. Get the word from the Father and the Son. Get this. 1 John chapter 3, verse 7. Little children, let no man deceive you. We got a lot of people being deceived because we got a bunch of damn clowns out here. Clown activity everywhere. Our people got to stop being deceived. Let's keep going. He that do righteous is righteous, even as he is righteous. That means following law, statutes, and commandments. He said righteous 3 times. Law, statutes, and commandments. Doing what the book say do. Not what no damn man say. I say this all the time. I'm going to keep saying. Believe the book. So, it's the beginning of the Boule. So now, I will let y'all watch the film and enjoy it. And with that said, enjoy the film, family.
The Mysterious Society of Elite Negroes. Defining this group has evaded us all. Who are they? And what exactly is their purpose? When addressing this group, the most essential element to grasp about identity is understanding the society known as Boule is a predominantly black fraternity. But unlike most fraternities, is non-collegiate. Becoming a member of this fraternity is contingent upon several qualifications. Among the most paramount is excellence of performance in one's field. There are only 5,000 members of Sigma Pi Phi, otherwise known as the Boule. Since the inception of this fraternity in 1904, several dozen of the most well-known so-called black figures of the past century were and are members. It is considered a great honor to become an archon of the Boule. Members range from W.E.B. Du Bois to Colin Powell, and from Kwesi Mfume to Martin Luther King. Contrary to the perceived notoriety, the purpose for this group, however, is perversely sinister. The Miseducation of the Negro is more than just a book by Carter G. Woodson. It has been a philosophy of American colonialism unto this day. And an essential part of this philosophy is using quasi-classically educated Negroes as harbingers for the black masses. Carter G. Woodson being a prime example, whom has been labeled by the establishment father of African American history. Woodson obtained his PhD from Harvard in 1912, where only he and W.E.B. Du Bois were the only black men to achieve such at the time. And at the same point, both of these men would become members of the Boule. One would think by reading Carter G. Woodson's somewhat unapologetically black and African-centric writings that he would have been considered radical and controversial to his white contemporaries. But if it weren't for these so-called white contemporaries, the Carter G. Woodson name would have never seen the eyes of the public. Most of his opposition came from black contemporaries who saw his amalgamation of American blacks with African culture as a conflation of history. As the case may be, the narrative states Carter sought funding in order to continue his endeavors into the establishment of a Negro-centered historical foundation. Inadequate of funding himself, he then turns to the preeminent perpetuators of Negro miseducation for financial backing: the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Julius Rosenwald Foundation. These foundations were created by some of the most unscrupulous businessmen in American history, yet these foundations would fund the spurious new black intellectual movement that culminated in the Harlem Renaissance.
Hearing about Harlem, going to Harlem, became exciting, new, different, and people went. They went to a place that others would say, you really want to go up there. But in fact, going up there could get you the time of your life. And going into, you also have to remember the early 20s before, during Prohibition, everyone wants to do just the opposite of what the law says. So of course, that again, that's another reason to go to Harlem. Go against the grain. Women, go against the grain socially. Cut your hair, wear the short flappers dresses. Go against societal norms. Harlem was that for white America.
The Julius Rosenwald Fund, for example, literally funded most of the renowned artists, musicians, authors, playwrights, and activists of the late 1920s, and many of the names associated prominently in Black American history. People like Claude McKay, Ralph Ellison, Marian Anderson, Julian Bond, W.E.B. Du Bois, Maya Angelou, and Langston Hughes were paid by the Rosenwald Foundation going all the way back to the 1920s. So these Black figures were being marketed to the masses by a small group of Jewish men as the leading Black scholars in the country. This very same Rosenwald Fund first conducted the degenerate syphilis study in 5 southern states, transpiring as a result of their initial blueprint in the Tuskegee experiments. In addition, the Julius Rosenwald Foundation is responsible for the construction of over 5,000 schools, most of these schools primarily built for Southern Blacks. Why was Rosenwald so interested in helping Black people? Rosenwald himself came from an immigrant family of Jewish merchants. As a young man, he learned the family trade as an apprentice in New York and began making clothes. This led to his partnership with Sears Roebuck, who allowed him to buy shares in the company after they were having financial trouble. The company revived under Rosenwald, and he became wealthy. Rosenwald, while working as a young man, developed a close friendship with Henry Goldman, another second-generation German Jew, who was best known for Goldman Sachs, a prime brokerage investment firm that his father Marcus founded in Bavaria, Germany. Rosenwald had other powerful friends as well, who would all be instrumental in helping him and people like him become the face of simulated social reform. These men would use their millions to champion the new Black agenda. When tracing the money to some of the most prominent Black organizations of the past, one is left with one very common denominator. This denominator is the deception behind the miseducation of the Negro, a history signed and sealed in an African slavery-connected identity delivered to you by ignorant or compromised Negroes who have been indoctrinated into a false dogmatic historical cover-up. When reading the words of Black scholars of the past, there seems to be a romanticized relationship between these authors and their supposed African heritage. In W.E.B. Du Bois' renowned work, The Souls of Black Folk, the reference to Africa was made nearly a dozen times. In each reference, the word Africa or African is inserted into the text to draw comparison by similarity between African and Black American culture. And consistently, in each case, Du Bois provides no credible historical background into the analytical significance of his comparison, but rather vague conjecture, leading the reader into biased presuppositions. In page 196, Du Bois makes a definitive statement. The social history of the Negro did not start in America. With just this statement alone, W.E.B. Du Bois threatens the historical credibility of his entire career of works. Understanding the original American was reclassified as African and Negro in the century prior to his birth is a reflection never echoed in his work. Furthermore, the reclassification of a people and lacking in acknowledgement of heritable indigenous rights is verifiable treachery. If Du Bois was a true historian, then he would have developed his own legitimate historical perspective and outline concerning the history of the so-called African American. Instead, his writings are the bougie Zionist propagated social commentaries of an uppity Negro. As someone who had completed an entire database in which he had gathered census information on Southern American plantation owners and slave statistics, Du Bois never dedicated any of his writings toward the indigenous American culture that existed on the continent prior to colonialism. and its connection to blacks in America. If anything, Du Bois could have been an instrument of the first American black regional beef. Instead of East versus West Coast rappers, it was Northern versus Southern Negroes. In writings that allude to the Northern Negro as progressive and the Southern Negro as a peon or pauper. His work, however, doesn't come completely without historical legitimacy, but instead narrated from the perspective of an outsider or spectator. In his book, The Souls of Black Folk, on page 48, Du Bois makes quick reference to the mulatto immigrants from the West Indies who immigrated to the North, whom had demanded to be considered freemen on the basis that they would seek assimilation and amalgamation with the nation on terms with other men. One of the families implicated in his text was an ode to his own ancestry. In his own words, the Du Bois family of New Haven sought to be not as slaves and not as Negroes. To be accurate, Du Bois, as the name suggests, was not American or even African for that matter. He claimed African ancestry from his mother's side, but his mother's Burghardt lineage wasn't black. His mother's grandfather was apparently a West African slave, but the Burghardt lineage was definitely Anglo-Dutch. On his father's side was the lineage of French Huguenots. His father Alfred had immigrated from Haiti to New Haven. By many accounts, his father could have been of mixed race origin, as French Huguenots were often known to comprise of a mulatto class. But with this being said, Du Bois had no ancestral roots in America, as did the so-called Negroes, whom had been inhabiting the land long before Eurasian contact. In fact, it wouldn't be until Du Bois was in college did he come face to face with the true plight of the Southern Negro. And accordingly, this was the first time in his life he had identified himself as being black.
David Levering Lewis, W.E.B. Du Bois?
Yes, he always insisted on that pronunciation. He did not like the Gallic pronunciation, though in his antecedents he was partly French.
Look at this nigga's lips. Look how tight this nigga's lips are. His rectum's probably tighter.
As I say decisively, Du Bois.
Did you ever meet him?
You know, I say in the acknowledgments that I did, and I realized when, after I finished a lot of research, that it had to be about 1947 when I was standing with my father on a college campus in Ohio. And my father and Du Bois were acquaintances, if not friends. And Du Bois apparently approached and asked me what I intended to do with my life. And I was then about 9 years old. I could now tell him a good part of my life was taken up answering that question by writing the first of this 2-volume biography.
Why is this nigga talking like that? He gotta be Boule.
Who was he?
W.E.B. Du Bois was a man who lived about 95 years, and so his life really spans the 20th century and its issues and its major personalities. He was born in the north, in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, a small town in the Berkshires, and educated elementary and high school there, and then attended college at Fisk University in Tennessee, and then took a second bachelor's at Harvard, and then went on to obtain the PhD in history from Harvard, the first African American to be awarded a doctorate. And before he did that, he spent about 2 years at the University of Berlin.
University. Where is this nigga from? I gotta find out where this nigga's from. Here it says this nigga is from Arkansas. The Boule got them niggas on that straight Buckingham, bruh.
Taught here and there at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote a book called The Philadelphia Negro, which is one of the first books of urban sociology in America. And then he went on to Atlanta University, and for 10 years he superintended the really pioneering studies, the Atlanta University studies, which simply took the whole gamut of African American and Southern life. And then he retired from teaching to the activity of being editor of the NAACP's magazine, The Crisis, from 1910 to 1934. And he was, of course, also a co-founder of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and it was he who insisted that it be colored, not Negro, not African, not black, but colored, because he wanted the association indeed to have a mission and mandate which would address itself to the larger issue of darker peoples everywhere. He was always thinking a bit ahead of the administrators, bureaucrats, and colleagues for whom the immediate and pragmatic was more compelling.
Like, his lips are so tight, talks like Dan Rather's bastard son.
Both verbally and in prose, he would espouse the position, but then a few years later he might well strike up another position, which was not, if in direct contradistinction to the previous position, more than a shade different. And so many of his allies found themselves puzzled as in his long life he took a variety of positions that were somewhat paradoxical. Underneath them all, though, was a principled consistency that racism must be combated, that human rights must be affirmed, and that economic justice was the key to the eventual accomplishment of parity and the enhancement of the great majority of the life chances of peoples.
University, he's got to be one of the most bougie niggas I've ever seen in my life. The underlying aspect of the ascension of many of these men was the conflation of the African and black identity. While many of these men were mulattoes passing as white, and even several with non-indigenous American roots, it is a matter of fact. Non-American blacks were at the forefront of black Hegelian deception in the early 20th century, as the quasi-leading voices of black America were tokens funded by Zionist Jewish first and second generation immigrants. Du Bois, although American born, was the offspring of Anglo-Dutch French immigrants. His greatest adversary, Marcus Garvey, was a Jamaican-born immigrant who proposed the idea of American blacks going back to Africa as though the entire black population of America had been a product of the slave trade, as did Du Bois. But nothing could be further from the truth. Du Bois has been proclaimed a Pan-Africanist by modern historians. This he and Garvey shared in philosophy, but their ideologies concerning the methods for black improvement were in conflict. These two men had numerous public spats. Perhaps Du Bois is best known for his contribution in the founding of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. But Du Bois wasn't the sole founder or source of funding for the NAACP. In truth, the NAACP was a predominantly Zionist white organization from its very inception. All of its officers, with the perverse hybrid exception of Du Bois, were either white abolitionists or Jewish, and Du Bois' role was merely as a public relations figurehead with no executive authority. The organization would go on to recruit several other Jewish leaders for pivotal roles within the organization. The NAACP would even recruit funds from Jacob Schiff, a German Jewish financier for the Rothschild family, whom had ironically funded communism and the Bolshevik Revolution. One of Schiff's major contentions with the Bolsheviks was their apparent anti-Semitism. But of course, the leaders of the Bolsheviks themselves were Jews. Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, even Stalin and Karl Marx had changed their names to conceal their Jewish identity. and then posed as revolutionaries and anti-Semites before the world, funded by the propaganda machine that has now amalgamated itself into the NAACP. And this transmutation would not become more apparent than when Du Bois proclaims himself a communist. This was a direct result of his dealings with his Jewish contemporaries, who encouraged Du Bois endlessly to present anti-Semitism and racism under the same light. Although Du Bois was supposedly working for the advancement of black people, he was well insulated within the ranks of non-blacks as the face for their coercive pitches to the masses. To describe him as a Marxist would be an understatement. Even after the age of 90, Du Bois was still endorsing communism, such a non-African philosophy for a self-proclaimed Pan-Africanist. Willie found comfort around his fair-skinned counterparts, as he had done for his entire childhood, as many of the men of the Boule had been mulattoes, socially accepted as white, just as the founding members of Sigma Pi Phi, Henry Minton and Algernon B. Jackson. Passing for white was obviously a thing for the inaugural class of Sigma Pi Phi, resembling more of a mayonnaise convention than a society of strong black men. Henry McKee Minton, co-founder, was the son of a mixed-race Union colonel and slumlord, John McKee. McKee, a man who erected housing projects in Philadelphia for blacks migrating north after the Civil War. McKee became wealthy by exploiting black transplants to Philadelphia by exchanging deeds to their lands and property they owned in the South for rent vouchers in his Philadelphia housing project. At the time of his death, John McKee was recognized as the wealthiest colored man in America, with over $4 million and over 4,000 acres of land scattered throughout 50 states. He only left $50 for each of his children in his will, however, while leaving the majority of his estate and wealth, over $2 million, to the Catholic Church, entrusting Archbishop Patrick John Ryan as the executor of his estate. However, the will was challenged, and as a result, his son Henry McKee Minton received $25,000, which would be just under $800,000 today. Henry, as a young man, attended the prestigious Phillips Exeter Academy boarding school in New Hampshire, whose notable graduates include some of the most influential names in 20th century American history, from Ulysses S. Grant Jr. to Mark Zuckerberg. Minton had spent a significant portion of his entire career passing for white, as did another Sigma Pi Phi founder, Algernon B. Jackson. Another mixed-race man who sported a blonde coif, an ode to his Caucasian mother, who was influential in his education at predominantly white institutions, like the University of Indiana, for which she was a member of the faculty. Jackson went on to prosper as a surgeon, becoming the first so-called black surgeon at Philadelphia Polyclinic Hospital, an exclusively white hospital, and then working as chief surgeon for Mercy Hospital in Philadelphia, where he worked for 20 plus years before taking a position at Howard. He left as hospital superintendent, a position which would be filled by his Boule brother, Henry McKee Minton. These two men ran in the most privileged circles in Black America and sought to bind men of like qualities to an organization and to develop contacts for the improvement of their careers. Together with 4 other men, they founded the Boule. In the beginning, Sigma Pi Phi was comprised of mostly physicians. One of these physicians, Robert Abel, was the brother of renowned architect Julian Abel. The Abel brothers were from a prominent black Philadelphia family whose roots lay in the establishment of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was the first black Episcopal church in the United States. Although the historical narrative elaborates little on the life and times of Robert, Julian seems to have lived a more noteworthy life. Julian is an architect to some of the most venerated structures of American academia, including the Widener Library on the campus of Harvard, the Philadelphia Central Library, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which includes the steps from the movie Rocky, the Allen Administration Building on the campus of Duke University, as well as Duke University Chapel, and most notably on the campus Cameron Indoor Stadium. The Abel family were some of the most illustrious blacks in Philadelphia. Eugene Moneyman Henson was another Philadelphia-based physician who joined the ranks of the light-skinned assassins. Additionally, Big Eddie Throat Baby Howard, a master Masonic medicine man in his own right, had already established a practice in Philadelphia by the year 1870. Being the first black graduate from Harvard Medical College, Howard was commissioned by the 12th Infantry of Pennsylvania, ascending to the rank of Surgeon General. To boot, Big Edwin Clarence Joseph Turpin Howard helped found Frederick Douglass Memorial Hospital in Philadelphia in 1895, the first black hospital in the city, likewise as he did with Mercy Hospital, along with his other Boule brethren.
And you say that he was only one of 3 people in Ghana that had a ZIL limousine.
Correct, yes. The Russians had a great admiration for Du Bois. He was quite useful to them. And indeed, more than that, Khrushchev and Du Bois hit it off famously in their several meetings. And so the Russian ambassador was instructed to give Du Bois that behemoth limousine, the ZIL. And so he had one, the ambassador, of course, and then Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, also.
You say that he got cables on when he died, were sent from Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, Nikita Khrushchev, and that in attendance was Gus Hall of the American Communist Party. Why did they like him so much, or why did they want to pay homage to him?
Well, his value to the Soviet cause was enormous. Here was the most impressive African-American intellectual, a man who was deemed widely to be the father of Pan-Africanism, the founder of the Civil Rights Movement. And now in the 50s, his politics were such that the Soviet Union thought it appropriate to bestow upon him the Lenin Peace Prize. And then,
This nigga said Lenin Peace Prize. That's an oxymoron. This nigga killed like 1 trillion people.
58, that was a time when Paul Robeson's passport was restored. A whole raft of people were once again able to travel. He went to the Soviet Union and was treated like a head of state virtually. Then to China with the same sort of treatment. And so if the Soviet Union hoped to encourage people within the United States and elsewhere to look upon Marxism, communism, scientific socialism with increasing favor, then Du Bois was useful in that regard.
Another face in this frilly flock of Philadelphia physicians was perhaps the blackest of them all, Little Dick Warwick. The Warwick family, another prominent Negro family in Philadelphia, whose roots were also tied to the abolitionist movement and the creation of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. As a result of their relationships and roles in abolitionist reformation, which included the Christianizing of blacks through the Methodist Church, this small Negro contingent out of Philadelphia was considered the Black American aristocracy. After the group's establishment in 1904, the Boule later expanded into Chicago in 1907 and Baltimore the following year in 1910, expanding south to Memphis and later into cities like St. Louis, Kansas City, Detroit, and Atlanta. Being considered for selection into Sigma Pi Phi was contingent first upon education and then excellence in one's field. But probably the most important qualification was legacy. For 2 decades, the Boule aggressively recruited all of the most prominent black families and professionals across the country for membership, hoping by which they could establish a black hierarchy. Over time, the membership became less of an excellence-based requirement and more of a legacy-based, which caused concerns that the standards for membership of inherited status wouldn't retain the quality of its founders, whom were considered by the elite as the most excellent of men. Yet, to be fair, all of the founding members of the Boule had also inherited legacy status through societies founded prior to the Boule, such as the Ugly Club in New York and the Free African Society in Philadelphia. The Negroes of the Northeast sought to separate themselves from the so-called lower-class Negroes, and the Methodist Church would make over the paupers of the plantation into the princes of the pulpit. 2 of these princes of the pew were Richard Allen, founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and Absalom Jones. Both of these men were born into slavery and Christianized by their Methodist overseers for the purposes of evangelizing slaves. In 1787, these men found the Free African Society, which at its inception was a religious institution which led to the establishment of the first independent black church in America. Richard Allen was born a slave on the plantation of prominent Philadelphia politician and Supreme Court Judge Benjamin Chew, who also had been a close personal friend of George Washington. Richard Allen was eventually sold to Stokely Sturgis, a white Methodist abolitionist, and while under the thumb of Sturgis, Richard Allen became a Methodist and began spreading gospel to the enslaved blacks. Eventually, Allen became a preacher at St. George's Episcopal in Philadelphia, a predominantly white church, but his services were restricted to sunrise sermons. This was around the time he and Absalom Jones founded the Free African Society, although he nor Jones were born free or African. At the root of their Christianization was slavery, and at the root of their slavery were men teaching them religion. But what was at the root of the men teaching them religion? Christianity wasn't inherently African, so why were these men amalgamating European philosophy with African identity? Did these men have any credible historical foundation for such claim? Both men born slaves in Delaware and taught their history and religion by whom? So what expectation should one have for Negroes who were indoctrinated by their oppressors to the point of claiming false identity to justifiably found something considered independent and black? The black bourgeoisie of Philadelphia were a product of abolitionist Christian propaganda, whose purpose is to keep the black masses in a state of perpetual confusion and ignorance. What better way than teaching Christianity to house niggas, and then having some of those house niggas propagate the black masses with futile race rhetoric from docile, dainty Negroes who despise their own people? The mindfuckery is extremely well calculated. Create a class of uppity conformist Negroes and use your resources to champion these individuals as the brightest and best. Another one of the illustrious Philly Negroes was a man by the name of James Forten, who was actually born free and became one of, if not the most influential of all the Negroes in Philadelphia. James Forten had served in the Navy as a privateer during the Revolutionary War. He was taken prisoner by the British Royal Navy during his stint, but was later released after being imprisoned for 9 months. He returned to Philadelphia and apprenticed as a ship sailmaker in a business previously worked by his deceased father, who had died on the job under business owner Robert Bridges. After the retirement of Bridges, Forten, who had become a foreman and Bridges' best employee, took a loan and purchased the business in 1798. In 1810, Forten invented a tool used to maneuver large cells, therefore making them easier to cut and sew. As a result, his business prospered, and soon James Forten's business made him one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia, regardless of race. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, many abolitionists and slave masters banded together for a single master plan to solve the black problem in American society. This began the first so-called Back to Africa movement, in which black Americans, some formerly enslaved, would move to West Africa in countries like Liberia and Sierra Leone in order to colonize these lands free of racial discrimination. This idea, proposed by the American Colonization Society, an organization supported by notorious slave owners like Kentucky's Henry Clay, was outright rejected by black Americans, who claimed they had been American and had no African association. Quote, from the problem of slavery in the age of emancipation. Forten had supported Paul Cuffey, a Boston shipbuilder who in 1815 transported 38 free blacks to Sierra Leone with the idea they could make a better life where not impeded by white racism. He was well aware of continuing problems due to harsh discrimination against blacks in the United States. To address community concerns and discuss potential for colonization, James Forten worked with Bishop Richard Allen of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the first independent black denomination in the United States, Absalom Jones and James Goulchester, to organize a meeting on this topic in Philadelphia. Their announced meeting in January 1817 at Bethel AME Church drew 3,000 attendees from Philadelphia. Hearing the strong views of this public forced a dramatic turning point for these leaders. By this time, most free blacks and slaves had been born in the United States and claimed it as their own, with their own families. At the meeting, Forten called for a vote asking who favored colonization. Not one man said yes. When he asked who was against it, the crowd resounded with a no that made the hall ring. All claimed the U.S. as their own and wanted to gain their full civil rights as citizens. After that meeting, Forten and the ministers strongly opposed the ACS, and Forten later converted William Lloyd Garrison, a younger white abolitionist from Boston, against the colonization schemes. Following the January meeting, Forten helped draft a resolution of the sense of the public, which he and other leaders sent to the Pennsylvania congressional delegation. In August, they published a longer address to the inhabitants of the city and county of Philadelphia, which attacked colonization, end quote. Perhaps James Forten was the most influential black in the entire country, and he adamantly opposed relocating to Africa, as did many of his countrymen. Forten had not been born a slave and did not inherit his status. He was a self-made man, to the utmost respect of his peers, which he earned by representing them to the opposition of their white so-called friends. Abolitionists and Quakers, along with Methodists, held themselves as the liberators of blacks in America. Among their objectives, concocting a scheme to displace black Americans from their homeland. It must be noted that the black population in America was significant prior to colonialism. The majority of the enslaved population were captured indigenous prisoners of war, whom had their land forcibly taken by pre-colonial European powers, predominantly the French in Canada and in Middle America, the Spanish in the South and the West, and the British in the East. The Virginia Slave Act imposed the right of Christian authority over anyone captured and held in bondage. Quote from the Virginia Slave Act, Henning's Statutes at Large, Volume 2, page 491. Jumping ahead to the middle. And whereas also those Indians that are taken in war or otherwise by our neighboring Indians, confederates or tributaries to his majesty, and this his plantation of Virginia, are slaves to the said neighboring Indians that so take them, and by them are likewise sold to his majesty's subjects here as slaves, be it therefore enacted by the governor council and the burgesses of this General Assembly, and it is enacted by the authority aforesaid, that all the said recited act of the 3rd of October 1670 be, and is hereby repealed and made utterly void to all intents and purposes whatsoever. And it be further enacted by the authority aforesaid, that all servants, except Turks and Moors, whilst in amity with his majesty, which from and after publication of this act shall be brought or imported into this country, either by sea or land, whether Negroes, Moors, mulattoes, or Indians, who in whose parentage and native country are not Christian at the time of their first purchase of such servant by some Christian, although afterwards and before such their importation and bringing into this country, they shall be converted to the Christian faith, and all Indians which shall hereafter be sold to our neighboring Indians or any other trafficking with us as for slaves are hereby adjudged, deemed, and taken, and shall be adjudged, deemed, and taken to be slaves to all intents and purposes, any law, usage, or custom to the contrary notwithstanding. End quote. From Henning's Statutes at Large, Volume 2, page 491, 1670, Virginia Slave Act. The first so-called African-American leaders in American history were essentially Christian and Zionist installed puppets, many of them having immigrant backgrounds. These people were used as instruments to mold the black narrative of American history and even black history in general. Indoctrinated by Christian abolitionists under the guise of anti-slavery, when their true motives were to use these token blacks to propagate Christianity and Pan-Africanism. No less noteworthy are the intellectual black families of the South, similar to the Warwicks, who moved north during Reconstruction in hopes to obtain prominence within the northern black aristocracy. Prestigious black landowners and businessmen from the South often enrolled their children in northern elite educational institutions such as Harvard and other Ivy League schools. The completion of their degrees held an unequal quality of comparison and guaranteed their position in the social caste system. The education, or rather indoctrination, disparity between blacks during Reconstruction fostered the Hegelian dispute at the heart of the philosophy of black progressiveness. Two opposing schools of thought were at play: social liberalism, a philosophy championed by the so-called talented 10 and the Boule, and self-actualization, a philosophy championed by Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey. Each of these men gaining power and influence through their relationships with wealthy white men. This would introduce the three-headed monster of the black Hegelian deception: integration, segregation, or separation. On the next episode of Boule, we will investigate the philosophies of Marcus Garvey and Booker T. Washington, and their opposition to W.E.B. Du Bois. We will also learn more about the roots of Sigma Pi Phi and their connection to black fraternities and Freemasonry.
So thankful for the affliction, yeah. It became my ears, so I can listen. It became my eyes, so I can pay attention. Now I'm able to see. It became the measurement, so I can tell the distance. Now I know how much time. Yeah. So thankful for the affliction. So thankful. Yeah. It became my ears, so I can listen. Yeah, now I can hear. It became my eyes, so I can pay attention. Yeah, now I can see. Then it became wisdom, so I can tell the difference. Yeah, yeah. Beating this flesh up till spiritually, yeah, it fall dead off. The outer layer like concrete, cause it's hard to shed off. Trying not to be a hypocrite, that would mean everything that I said was off. So I wake up, grab my sword, and try to cut my own head off before I take the beam out of you. When it come to common sense, trying to make a few, the righteous shall barely be saved. It's already hard enough to make it through. Our one job is the load. Why in the world would I make it too? So thankful for the affliction, cause now I know what to do. The affliction was pain turned into a game. Yeah. The affliction was practice improving on my aim. Now I got my goals in sight. Now I got my goals in sight. So thankful for the affliction. Yeah. It became my ears, so I can listen. It became my eyes, so I can pay attention. Now I'm able to see. It became the measurement, so I can tell the distance. Now I know how much time. Yeah. So thankful for the affliction. So thankful. Yeah. It became my ears, so I can listen. Yeah. Now I can hear. It became my eyes, so I can pay attention. Yeah. Now I can see. Then it became wisdom, so I can tell the difference. Yeah. I know what to do. Being tore down, being wore down, built me up, made me war tough. Now I'm really up, shields up. This cup of love, making sure hours ain't wasted. Try to praise him every second to make sure hours ain't wasted. My winter's so cold. Had to put the heat in. Revenge is the dish best served cold. Wine glass had to put some antifreeze in. Was afflicted, but assisted. So I'm not a goner than a table full of demons with a fork in my hand, and I'm banging on the table saying, "Sir, what you want? I'm afflicted." The affliction was pain turned into a game. Yeah, the affliction was practice improving on my aim. Now I got my goals in sight. Now I got my goals in sight. So thankful, for the affliction, yeah. It became my ears, so I can listen. It became my ears, so I can listen. It became my eyes, so I can pay attention. Now I'm able to see. It became the measurement, so I can tell the distance. Now I know how much time. Yeah. So thankful, for the affliction. So thankful. Yeah. It became my ears, so I can listen. Yeah. Now I can hear. It became my eyes, so I can pay attention. Yeah. Now I can see. Then it became wisdom, so I can tell the difference.